Hi, this is Susan DeFace Washington, and I would like to thank you for watching Hope Fest Online. I am so sorry that I couldn't be there due to the circumstances, but Amarillo, Texas, and Sharing Help Ministry are dear to my heart. I lived in Amarillo for years. I graduated from WT, and I taught school at Sam Houston Middle School for 6 years before returning to the Dallas area. And Sharing Help Ministry does amazing work. As someone who was incarcerated, I see the value of what they do. They provide life recovery Bibles to women who are in jail and in prison. And that is so important because when you are locked up, your mind is open. Your mind is open to the Lord. It's just a time when you're going to search and you're going to seek because your life has been imploded. For me, it was huge because I just didn't know what had happened, how I got there. And so I sought the Lord during that time. But you can't, because if you don't have a Bible, you can't know the Lord. And so it's huge that they do that and they provide those Bibles to inmates. Another thing incredible about the ministry is Patsy's Place. And it's a transitional home for women to go to after they are released from jail or prison. And that's so important because if you don't have a place to go or a safe place to go, the likelihood of you returning to prison is very high. And so I just applaud all they do. And like I said, I was incarcerated. I will celebrate 18 years clean on July 15th. And the Lord has restored my life. I basically lost everything due to my addiction. But I did my part, and with God's blessing, all has been restored. And I love that Patsy's Place gives women the tools they need to be successful and to be productive members of society. And I just want to thank you again for joining us to watch this online. And they do amazing work. They are impacting lives, changing the trajectory of women who probably have no hope right now. And I want to thank them for all they do. This is a tough time right now in our country, but I just want you to know that I know God is on his throne. I know he's in control, and I just pray you are blessed and that you stay well. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share some of my story with you. You know, when I was growing up, I had it good. I really don't remember a lot about my younger life, but we went snow skiing in the winter. By the time I was 6 years old, I was skiing down mountains. We went to the beach in the summer. We spent 2 weeks at a lake in Arkansas. By the time I was 7, I was slaloming and jumping wakes. We had a lot of fun. We spent our weekends at Cedar Creek Lake, but all that changed when my brother committed suicide. And basically, that just changed my family. My parents never recovered from that. We didn't go to church. I didn't know the Lord. I believed on some level, but my family changed. And time went on, and I don't really recall a lot, but by the time I got to high school, my father had moved out. He moved to our lake house, and it left me and my mother alone. My sister was married and lived in Amarillo. And my mother was a really severe alcoholic. She was basically passed out every day. When I got home from school, it had become my normal to look for her body and just make sure she was alive. One day she drank all the perfume in the house because there was no vodka. One day she drank bottles of rubbing alcohol because there was no vodka. And when she completely ran out of everything, she would start going through DTs, and I would have to take her to the hospital. I was 16, 17, 18 years old, and that was my home life. You know, and I knew I was going to find my mother's body because I knew you can't treat your body that way and live, and she looked so bad. But I went to school every day. I was popular. I was head cheerleader. No one at my school knew this was going on in my life because I was brought up to keep secrets and to pretend everything was okay. When I graduated from high school, I graduated with honors. And I was really proud of that. And the ceremony was big. I went to a really big high school in Dallas. We had over 1,000 in our graduating class. And when it was over, my friends were meeting up with their families, and no one had come for me. And I was really hurt by that, and I was really mad. And when I got home later, my mother staggered into my room, and I just hated her. And I said, "Get the blank out of my room. I just wish you were dead." And I slammed the door, and I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I found her body. And I was overcome with guilt and shame. there was this accusing voice telling me I was responsible for her death and told me not to share my secret. You know, our secrets are destructive. We have to be careful with that. Satan wants us to keep things in the dark, and we need to bring them into the light so God can bring healing. But I kept that secret. But you know how I told you I always knew I'd find her dead? I obsessed over that because I spent a lot of time alone growing up. And I thought I would run out of the house screaming. I thought I would be an emotional wreck. But I calmly walked out of the room, and I called my dad, who was an hour away, and I asked him to come home. I said, something's terribly wrong with Mother. He didn't believe me. My dad could be very critical and hard. He was saying she's just passed out. And I was like, in my head, I was going, Daddy, don't make me say these words because I'm all alone. But he finally agreed, and I sat on the carpet, and he was an hour away. And God was with me because he gave me the strength to be in that situation. He was with me, and he sustained me. So where's God when it all goes wrong? He's usually right there with you. And after Mother died, my dad went back to the lake, and my sister went back to her family in Amarillo, and I lived in this house where my brother shot himself in one room, and my mother drank herself to death in another. And I was tormented. I felt so guilty. I would have this recurring nightmare every night of my mother and brother in this garish clown makeup accusing me of being a killer. And I'd wake up all alone, and I just felt so alone, and I felt so unloved. And God must have been with me because I don't know how I survived that. And it wasn't long after that I went to live with my sister. And my sister grew up in a different home than me. And we weren't real close because she was out of the home. By the time all this happened with David, she had not a clue how bad Mother was because we kept it all secret. But when I went to Kathy and lived with her, I felt loved. She loved me unconditionally. And I hadn't felt that before. I know Kathy is the first place I saw Jesus. And I thank God every day that she was my sister because she loved me without limits. She just loved me. And I stayed up there, and I went to college, and I got married, and we started having children. I graduated and became a teacher. God was with me because I had a lot of stuff, and somehow he gave me the strength to do these things. But I have 3 children, Haley, and this is Haley right here. She's 28, Alexis, 25, and Sammy, who's 24. And life was good. I had never dealt with any of my stuff, so it wasn't great, but I was functioning. But in 1998, my sister, who was my rock and my anchor, was diagnosed with cancer. And we knew not long after the diagnosis that it was terminal. And I couldn't imagine life without Kathy. Me and my dad didn't get along, and there was no other family, no cousins, no aunts, no uncles. And I just couldn't imagine life without Kathy, and I began doing drugs. And I began doing methamphetamine. It took over my life. It robbed me of my career. CPS came and took my children from school one day, and I ended up in prison. And prison was hard, you know. I would be in prison and like, how did I end up? You know, I was teaching school. How did I end up in here? And but God was with me there. When we went through all these diagnostic units and you had to do this testing, and I finally got to my real unit where they were going to give us a job. And I was with about 40 girls. And we were in line, and this lieutenant would give you the job. And every girl was getting the job called on the hoe squad. It was where you were chained and shackled together, and you hoed the ground all day long. I don't know what you hoed. I don't know any details about that, but I knew I didn't want to do it. And when she got to me, she looked at my testing. She goes, "You're really smart." And I just said, "Yeah." And she goes, "I bet you can alphabetize." And I was like, "Yeah, I can alphabetize really good." I didn't know that was a skill that would come in so handy here. But she goes, "I'm going to put you in the library." And so I got this great job. God was with me because I got to work in the air conditioning, and I got to read books all the time. So my choices of doing drugs got me to prison. No matter how hard our life is, we have choices. And our choices have consequences. And there's no excuses for it. But God was with me there, and he gave me favor in prison, and that was pretty cool. I ended up going to work on a pig farm in prison too, which that was a promotion somehow, and I was like, I didn't get that, but I was like saying, hey, I really don't want to be promoted, but prison didn't let you do that. And so, but then I paroled. And I got out, and I came back with my family. And this was a good time. We were living in Wiley. When CPS took the kids, they went to live with my husband's parents. And so we ended up in Wiley. And this is when God really started working in my life. My younger children met this family who goes to New Hope. They had kids the same age, and they started bringing them to New Hope, and I thought that was great. I thought, I don't need church, but it's good for them. And I was like, they can't know anything about me. You know, church people can't know I'm a recovering drug addict, ex-con, and all this. But the Christmas of 2004, that family went skiing for the first time, and their 12-year-old son skied into a tree and died instantly. And I was devastated for him, and I thought, they're going to fall apart. They're going to become alcoholics. They're going to just everything that happened in my life. And that didn't happen. They were empowered with strength, hope, and courage. And I didn't know where it came from. But I thought, I knew loss and I knew tragic loss. But I thought the loss of a child has to be the hardest loss of all. And for them to walk that out, I was like, I need that power. And, you know, I go to my scripture that I'm talking about today, Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for what is being done now, the saving of many lives. And as tragic as Alex Jensen's death was, many lives have been saved, mine included. I came to the Lord through the death. God will transform our suffering if we let him. And the Jensens let him, and I watched them model that. Once I shared all my secrets, I began to walk in freedom, and God blessed me. I got a better job. I got my teaching certificate back. God was just with us. He restored my relationship with my children and my husband and my family. In 2008, God really showed me where he was. I found out my 15-year-old daughter was pregnant. And my first thought, because we go to old patterns of thinking that are ingrained, you know, and I was like, we'll get an abortion and no one will ever know, because that's what I grew up with. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Let's hide it if at all possible. But God convicted me. And I had a home team that night. Well, it was called home team. Now it's called life group. And I had a life group that night, and I was like, I've got to talk to my life group. And I was scared, because I was scared they would judge me. I was scared I was going to get kicked out of leading a home team, because, you know, I'm already this ex-con drug addict, and now I have a pregnant teenager. But that night, I talked to this group of people, and I told them, and they surrounded me and prayed for me. And then they told me people to talk to at our church who has experienced teenage pregnancy. I wasn't alone in it. I didn't keep it in the dark, so I was able to walk in freedom. And Alexis made the decision to raise her daughter, and we decided to help her. And I can't imagine life without Riley. She's 9 years old today, and she is a blessing. And life went on. I began sharing my story, working in a prison ministry and speaking. In 2012, I knew that a girl was going to write an article for the Dallas Morning News, and so I was going to get some publicity. And so God was opening doors for me to share my story. And He restored my relationship with my father. And my father, me and him had a really, he was cruel to me. He would throw vodka on my head, tell me he wished I would have died instead of my sister. He would tell me I was fat, I was ugly, that, he would just such condemnation at times when he was drunk. And I kind of got bitter about it. And I was like, I'm done with him. He had lost everything, and I was supporting him in a nursing home. I was like, I'm done. But I met with Lynn, and Lynn and me had this session where a lot of healing came place. And I completely forgave my father. And God I couldn't do it on my own. God allowed it, because I saw my dad. I saw his brokenness. I saw how hurt he was. He had lost his son, his daughter, and his wife tragically. And I could just love him and not expect anything in return. The Lord used me to bring my dad to him. Right before he died. I went to my daddy and I just said, Daddy, I know you did the best you could, but that you never got over David's death. And when I said my brother's name, which we had never said since he died, my daddy broke, and he accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior. And he died 2 months later. That's a good thing. When I was at the hospital with him, he had a DNR and he had asphyxiated on something. And so I was with him, and they had told me the oxygen levels would slowly go down. And so I had fallen asleep. About midnight, I fell asleep. But about 1 a.m, I had this dream, and it was my mother. And it wasn't my mother in clown makeup, My mother was beautiful, and she was talking to me loving. She wasn't how I guess God intended her to be for me. And it was so powerful, and she told me to wake up. And when I woke up, the oxygen was really low, and my daddy died within like 2 to 3 minutes. And I was able to pray over him, and I was able to say scripture over him. God was with me when my daddy died, and he woke me with a comforting dream of my mother, and it was so powerful. After daddy died, I kind of thought we were done with death. And I don't know why. I just thought everyone's gone. Both my brother, sister, my parents, my grandparents. And but God was using my story. And in 2012, he was opening doors. Now, March 5th of 2012, my daughter Haley had her first baby, Kendall Grace. And I got to be there. And I was there when Riley was born, but Alexis was a teenager, so I was focusing on Alexis. But when Kendall was born, I got to watch the miracle of birth, and it was a powerful day. After that, we spent Mother's Day together, Memorial Day together. God had restored these relationships with my children. Then on June 7th, I was driving to work, and my phone rang. And it was a Wiley police officer, and he said my daughter Alexis had been in a car accident and that I needed to get to the medical center of Plano. And I asked him if she was okay, and he said he didn't know, that he arrived after the wreck. And so I started driving. I was worried, but not real worried. I'd never dealt with a car wreck. I was worried about her car because I knew we only had liability insurance. I was worried about her job because I knew that she wasn't at work. And so I got to the hospital, and I ran into emergency, and they said, you need to go back there. So I went through these doors, and I started looking in rooms, and they stopped me. They go, what are you doing? I go, I'm here to see Alexis Rose Washington. And they go, you need to go into this room. A doctor needs to talk to you. So I was a little concerned, but I was still like, okay. And I sat down, and then this doctor came in with no emotion, and he said, we did everything we could. I'm sorry, she's gone. And I was like, in my wildest dreams, I never imagined she would die. I wasn't prepared for that, and I really wasn't prepared for him to say it that way. I was kind of like, are you really telling me that like that? And so I screamed. But in moments, my family started coming, and I had to tell them, and they knew, they just saw my face, but my church family came because I don't have family. So all these people from New Hope came into the hospital to support my family, but I still felt overwhelmed, and I was wondering where God was, and I didn't get it. I never imagined that would happen, and I didn't understand the wreck. So I was in this room with the DPS officer, and Jill Crow was in there with me, and Keith Spurgeon. And so he was explaining the wreck, and he said she was speeding, it was raining, and her tires were worn. And when he said her tires were worn, I heard, this is your fault. You should have got her tires. That same accusing voice that accused me of killing my mother. And I began to just crumble. But then God spoke to me, and he whispered Psalm 139, and I think it was audible, because I sat up, and that code of shame and guilt is just so familiar to me. I just kind of shrugged it off. And I said, no. And I don't know if I said it out loud, but I looked at Keith, and I go, Keith, Psalm 139 says our days are numbered, that he knows the number of our days before we are born. He knew Alexis would die today before she was born. This is not my fault. It's not my burden to carry. He did not cause this, but he allowed it, and I have to trust his plan. I have to trust his plan. And I felt the power of the Lord and his Spirit fill me, and I've been walking in that power ever since. 600 people came to New Hope to Alexis's funeral. That night, 200 people gave their lives to the Lord. What was intended to hurt me, God used for good and saved many lives through my daughter's death, as he did through Alex Jensen's death. We have a perspective, and we can look at things in different ways, but if we will trust God's sovereignty in all aspects of our life and know if he's allowed something. Now, our choices cause us a lot of problems. God doesn't cause this. So we have control in our choices. But if he allows something, he will bring good from it. So we adjusted to life without Alexis. We adopted her daughter, Riley. About a month after Alexis died, I was back at work, and I was fragile. And we were busy. I work in new home sales now. And that month we sold 21 homes. That's a lot of homes in 1 month. So it was busy. And this one day it finally calmed down. And my boss and another girl who worked with us left to go eat. And I was in the office by myself. And I thought, I had some flank steak, this rosemary flank steak from Market Street, in the refrigerator. And And I went to get it, and I thought, I'm going to eat a bite of this because these people ran in. And they go, we're not here to buy a house, but a lot of people say that, so you're supposed to still talk to them. If any of my bosses are here, I do that. So I ran and got the flank steak, and I went and took a bite, and I immediately choked. And I've never choked in my life before. And so I tried to cough, and it wasn't working. I went to take a drink of water, and water just came spewing out. And I started to panic, and I thought, I've got to get this out. So I was going to go to the restroom. And I started running to the restroom, and I thought, I'm not going to make it. And so I had some heels on, and there were wood floors in the house, so I started like stomping, and I went to scream, and no sound came out. There was no air coming anywhere. And then I really began to panic because those people were upstairs. I was like, I've got to get upstairs. So I went, and I started up the stairs, and I collapsed. And then I heard this voice saying, don't worry, I'm here to help you. And it was weird because it was really deep, and I was like, and he came down and he did the Heimlich, and he saved my life. He saved my life. And I began to cry, and he got shook up because he had no plans. They were driving down Independence in Frisco, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he said, let's go in here. And his wife was like, what? No. And he goes, no, let's go in here. I want to go in this model home. They weren't looking for a home. God sent him there to save me, and his job is a first responder. He saved my life, and God was with me. So he wasn't done with me yet, for sure. So I always thank him for that, and I didn't eat flank steak for a long time, even though I loved it. I love it. But I was like, I went one day, and I was like, God does not want me to walk in fear. I'm going to eat flank steak again. So I did it. So life went on, and we started having more children. Haley had a baby named Haven. My son Wesley had a little boy named Wes. And my family was growing. God was opening doors. I published my book in 2015 called From Pom Poms to Prison because I was a cheerleader. And so God was good. And Halloween of 2015 was just a great night. I took off work. It's kind of weird I took off that day, but I took off, and we all met at my husband's parents. Kendall was 3, and she was Anna. Riley was Little Red Riding Hood. Haven was a little lamb, and Wesley was Mickey Mouse. And it was just a precious day. We went trick-or-treating, and it was just a wonderful time. And then, on November 5th, my phone rings, and it's my daughter, Haley. And she's crying, and she said, Mom, Kendall and Tony have been in a wreck, and they won't tell me how they are. You need to come get me. And so I was off work, so I jumped in my car, and I began driving. And she called me back, and she said, Mama, the police are going to come get me. And she goes, so just meet me at the hospital. So now I have an experience of a really bad wreck, so I'm scared, but I'm praying. I'm thinking, there's no way. There's no way. So I'm praying to God all the way, and I'm driving. I get on George Bush, and traffic stops. And I don't have my radio on. I always listen to my radio. So that was kind of strange, but traffic stopped. So I'm kind of cussing a little bit. Sorry, God. And I get off the road, and I get on Central, and I get to the hospital. And Haley and the policeman get there about the same time, and he goes and finds a nurse. And the nurse says, we need to take you to this room. A doctor needs to talk to you. And my heart's breaking. And he takes us to this room, and this beautiful young doctor comes in. She has this long, beautiful hair, and she can't look at Haley, so I knew. And she begins to cry, and she said, we did everything we could, but there was too much trauma, and she's gone. And up to that point, the hardest thing I've ever heard is that my daughter died. but after that, watching my daughter lose her daughter, and not being able to help, and knowing that pain, and not being able to do anything is the hardest moment of my life. But I had to trust God, and I was mad at God. And so I needed to get alone with God because for some reason I thought I couldn't scream at him in front of people. And so I'm driving to the hospital, and I'm yelling at him, and I'm like, God, this isn't fair. I've lost so many people. I have people my age, I'm 56, that have still only lost their grandparents. I go, I've lost everyone. This isn't fair. And I'm yelling, but he meets me in my suffering. He comforts me. He lets me know he sent his son to die on a cross so that we could have eternal life, and that Kendall and Alexis both are with him, and that I need to trust him, that he allowed this and he has a plan in it. We stayed at the hospital for a while, and then we needed to go see Tony. Tony was hurt critically. He was in surgery. We weren't sure Tony was going to make it. He had a traumatic brain injury. Tony couldn't come to Kendall's funeral because he was in a coma. But we had the funeral, and I was still kind of like, God, I don't get this. Where is God? And something amazing happened. After the wreck, I get a call from my work, and I was told someone wanted to anonymously buy Haley a car. And we were like, thank you, because the only car they had was totaled. And Haley wasn't working. Tony had just graduated from paramedic school and passed the paramedic exam right before the wreck. And so they were living on the GI Bill. That wasn't happening anymore, so this was a blessing. So I said, thank you so much. So we went through things, and about a week after the funeral, I get a call. And let me backtrack and tell you about the wreck. The day of the wreck, Tony and Kendall were going to preschool, and he came upon a slower moving car and swerved and lost control. He was catapulted into oncoming traffic, and he was hit by 2 cars. That's why George Bush was stopped that day. It was already all over the news, and I never turned on the radio because God protected me. God was with me. And God showed me he was right there in that wreck, because when the people went to get the car, Gabby goes, Susan, we talked about 5 or 6 different dealerships, and we chose Freeman Toyota. And one day, me and Bruce went up there, and we told the story, and the lady's face went white. And she goes, you're not going to believe this. My sales manager is the car that hit him, and he tried to get that baby out of the car. And what that said to me is God was there. He allowed it, but he was there. He was working in it, because what are the odds of all the car dealerships in DFW, of all the traffic on George Bush that day, that would happen? There aren't odds with God. God's in control. And so I trusted God, and we just laid it at his feet. And you know what? He or whoever, Satan, people intended to hurt us, God intended for good. My daughter Haley got baptized. She's reaching out to people who've lost children. She is in a good place. You know, she is trusting God. And Tony has healed so much. And I'm going to share that with you in a minute. Can y'all stand up? Can you stand up, Tony? Tony couldn't walk at first. Come on. And now he's walking with a cane. And there's so much healing. In a minute, I'll show you some photos from the other. But, you know, our God is a good God. And if I can say anything to you, that he is with us in our suffering. You know, like Joseph, he could have walked in unforgiveness. He had all these things happen to him where he could have been angry, bitter, but he didn't. He trusted God's sovereignty, and he trusted his plan, even though he didn't understand it, even though it doesn't make sense. And that's what we have to do. And that's the way we can get through our tragedy and through our pain, is to trust in the Lord. You know, what's amazing, Kendall was born on 3/5, and God gave us Proverbs 3:5 as a scripture around her. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. And he has revealed that to us in many ways. She was 3 months when Alexis died. Kendall was 3 years old when she died. I bought a house, the address is 305. You know, I was like, okay, God, I get it. And God is there. He's working in our lives if we will look for him. And if you will look for him, you will see him. But we have to look for him. We have to focus on that. And if we focus on our pain and the unfairness of it all, we're just going to wallow, and bad things are going to happen. And I've lived my life both ways, without God, and now I've lived it. I've suffered my greatest tragedies since I've known the Lord. And I'm so thankful to know him, because I know I couldn't have made it through. I would have taken my life. I would have ended up a drug addict. I would have been killed by doing drugs. But I have 15 years clean and sober. And that's because of the Lord, and that's because of his strength.